Fuel What Matters podcast focuses on what fuels you. From products to entrepreneurship to living a healthy lifestyle, we have you covered.
Hey everyone, welcome to Team X&D's podcast, the Fuel What Matters segment. I'm Jason St. Clair, I'm one of the owners. Today I have special guest Erik Averill, a dear friend of mine. He's actually helped me and guided me a lot in my career, but also just been a sounding board for advice and things that, I'd go to for a friend. So Erik, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Erik, he's ASU alumni, ex-professional baseball player. We'll get into that, all the hits I got off Erik.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
A lot of people got lots of hits off me. That's why I'm sitting here.
He's also a business owner, a private wealth management to many high-level athletes and also just people in general. Erik, wanted to bring you in today just because I think this is one of the biggest conversations that should be had at a younger age. And I don't even know what age that should begin, but it feels like it should be like high school, teaching people finances, right? But let's talk a little about your past. Where are you from?
Originally, Orange, California. So grew up, born and raised Southern California, and found my way out to Arizona, playing baseball at Arizona State, and obviously had a good time there. Played a few years professionally. That's obviously how we got introduced. And this is a great place to live during the off season because it's October through February, beautiful out, 70 degrees, and then career was over, and now I get to enjoy the hot desert. But I've been here in the Valley since 2002, and it's home.
So you're a left-handed pitcher. How did you end up picking ASU?
Yeah, interesting story. Being in Southern California, it's obviously a hotbed, and there's a lot of good schools around, and was fortunate to be recruited, really with the opportunity to probably go play anywhere. But it was the recruiting process and the experience of the on-campus visit at ASU. At the time, our head coach was a guy named Pat Murphy. He's now the bench coach of the Milwaukee Brewers. And at that time, Barry Bonds was one of the biggest names in baseball. He's an ASU alumni, and you came in and just saw on the wall Reggie Jackson and Barry Bonds, and very notorious, prestigious university. And so that's how I ended up at ASU.
So from ASU, had a successful career in college baseball, was drafted by the Detroit Tigers,
Yes.
right? What year was that?
2005.
And how long did you play?
Just parts of 4.5 seasons. So 2009 was my last season.
So Erik and I, we met, well, I think we kind of knew of each other, but we met obviously playing against each other, which was that 06?
2006, the Midwest League.
Yeah, the Midwest League.
Battle Creek, Michigan,
oh
right?
Oh, my gosh. That was just the armpit for me. I was on a rehab assignment, and, I remember Erik specifically, this hot shot from ASU, lefty, and I do remember at home hitting against you, which was – he was a good pitcher, you guys. But that's when we met, and then I retired in 07, and I went into corporate America, unfortunately. No, but found out it wasn't for me. And I think the next time we came across, or our lives, came across, cross paths was in 2000, was it 10-ish?
10.
I think you were looking to be a sports agent yourself, right?
Yeah. 2009, 2010, I was going through that process of deciding, as my career closed, do I want to be a sports agent? Do I want to go in the financial route? And that was really driven by probably the same reason you got into it, is being a professional athlete. You realize you're so young and so locked in on what you're trying to do that you are really relying on your agent to make so many life decisions, let alone your career, that it's an opportunity to be probably the most influential person in an athlete's life. So that was, I knew an opportunity was where you were working at the time was a potential place where I was trying to be hired.
Yeah, and actually, if he didn't take the job, I probably wouldn't have had the job. Erik would have been a really good sports agent. And for me, I made the decision after going to corporate America that I knew that I could help young kids help make those decisions. I took a different route than Erik. I signed out of high school. Hindsight 2020, I still wouldn't take it back. Everyone asked me, what would you do differently? And the life experience that I got from signing out of high school is a lot different than what you got out of college. And that was just my journey. But I felt that I could help players as a baseball agent make that decision whether sign out of high school or go to college. So how did you get into finances?
Yeah, I think for so many athletes, as we're all familiar with, is you get thrust into professional sports. And I think one of the things that we know right away is there's a difference between amateur sports and professional sports from a skill set and what you need to do on the field. But a lot of people don't really prepare you nor hold you accountable to what it takes to be a professional off the field and everything that comes with that, whether it's money, relationships, just integrity, professionalism, right? And during my career, it's been covered widely that athletes don't end up in good situations with money. Mm-hmm. And not just athletes, it's pretty much if you look at any person who comes into sudden wealth, whether it's winning the lottery, whether it's a musician, an entertainer, a founder of a company that all of a sudden pops, right, is usually the wealth is not a result of like strong business acumen. It's you're very good at a very specific craft or business decision. And then all of a sudden wealth is a byproduct. And when it's mismanaged, not only do you end up in a worse situation from a financial standpoint, but it can kind of wreak havoc on relationships. And so when I was playing, I saw a lot of this going on, was very intrigued by it, just asking the questions of like, I'm in the locker room like with all these guys. I consider all of us actually highly intelligent and most of us high integrity people. So why, when you have intelligent people with high integrity who are hiring advisors, why are they all ending up in bad situations? And it was something that really triggered my heart to want to be a part of that solution.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I actually, when I would sit down with a possible prospect to be a client or even clients, I would tell them, when you're looking to hire a financial advisor, you need to trust them more than you trust me because that's their livelihood. Yeah. But that also, takes the approach of just someone else who's working a business or a business owner or working for someone, how important finances are and how volatile they can be, even if you run into a little bit of money, even if it's just like a bonus, right? It's like, what do you do with that? And so I wanted to bring you in here and just kind of like give some low-level advice. But let's start with, you're a wealth management planner, and I know there's certifications that you had to go through. What kind of certifications do you have to be able to give advice on this topic? Yeah,
so I'll give you a little background about the industry. Right now, there's around 300,000 people that will use the term financial advisor, and it's very convoluted. That could be really an insurance agent, that could be a stockbroker, it could be someone like myself who's an actual certified financial planner, certified private wealth advisor, and so we, and as I say we, the financial industry don't do consumers a very good service because it's almost buyer beware. Like you have to do a lot more due diligence to know who's qualified to give advice. But a great starting place that I tell everybody is there is a designation. It's called the Certified Financial Planning Designation, so the CFP. And there are about 82,000 CFPs in the United States, which is fantastic. So really the difference there is it's not just expertise in investments from a specific company. It's comprehensive. So taxes, investment, insurance, estate planning. There's actually 72 core topics, whether it's student loans and education planning and, long-term care and estate planning. And so it's really a CFP is going to be able to help you navigate advice across anything that money touches. And I think that's the interesting thing when we think about money or people hear the term financial advisor or financial advice, they think first and foremost only about investments. But the question I always pose to people is like, think through just today, how many decisions involved money? How many times did you make a decision or have a thought that somehow money was involved in? And that's really where we all need advice. It's nothing less than investment advice, but it's like, how do we make sound financial decisions in a day-to-day context?
Yeah, that's actually a powerful question right there. I probably need to ask myself that. Erik's helped me in my personal finances, guide me through a lot of different things. Their accountant, Robbie, who's just a wizard, has done a great job with my tax prep and also just my investments as well, because I would be lost without them. Erik, what's your company's name?
Yeah, so we're AWM. We're the fancy term's a multifamily office. All that really means is that we provide comprehensive advice to primarily professional athletes, founders, key employees in the venture capital space. But the big difference between us and most other groups is we're completely integrated. You had mentioned Robbie, our CPA, that we're a one-stop shop to really provide every service to manage your entire net worth, not just investments.
Awesome. And the most, I think, intriguing topic to me, and I think to many people listening to this, is two things: how to overcome debt, and then how do you pay off the debt, but then also save? I know this is a very general question, right? But like, what's your stance on? There's a lot of debt. It's credit card debt, it's student loan debt. If someone were just to come to you and ask you how to get out of debt, again, that's a general question. How would you answer that?
Yeah, so track with me here because I'm going to use an analogy because what I find a lot of times when we start to talk about money, there's this paralysis by analysis, and we all have different relationships with money. And one of the unfortunate things is, you had said it in the very beginning, very few of us have had formal training. So by osmosis, we're a byproduct of what we saw when we were children and then kind of what's just been caught. And so we don't have a good game plan, but we all understand kind of health and staying healthy and eating too many calories. And we know that ultimately we need to move. We need to eat less calories than we burn, right, to stay healthy. And then we probably need to sleep and rest. And so ultimately the answer of like how to overcome debt, it first starts with, as if you're going into a gym. I wouldn't just give you this gnarly program that you should be doing all of, you shouldn't start CrossFit when you've never worked out, is my whole point. So the first thing we would do is sit down and just kind of assess where you're at. Because before we can make any future goals, I think a lot of people don't actually have a snapshot of everything in one place. If you asked somebody, hey, how much income do you have coming in? They probably know how much they make. But the next question, if I ask you, how much do you spend on a yearly basis? Most people underestimate this by about 30%. And so they start tackling debt without actually having the whole picture. My analogy is it would be like me coming in or you coming in and being like, hey, Erik, I want to lose some weight. And I'm like, hey, you know what? You got to do squats. And you're like, okay, squats are great, but is that actually going to help me accomplish what I need? So first, let's assess where you're at. We need to have a picture of what's coming in, what's going out, and then we can lay out a game plan. And what I would say is it far more comes to how do we change habit formation over the long term, because we can tackle something quickly, but you're going to find yourself in the same situation if we haven't changed your habits with money.
Right. Are there like general numbers that I guess, on the population of America, like what the general income is, maybe like middle class?
Yeah, so obviously it's very contextual and geographic of where you live, but I mean, like the median income is around the high 40s, so I think it's around $47,000. The interesting stat, which I think will blow people's mind, they may be, as a listener, you might be familiar with the Happiness Project. But what it really says is once you reach an income level of around $75,000, any dollar above and beyond that's not going to provide much extra value or happiness to your life. And so ultimately, I think the bigger question for all of us is asking is like, what are we trying to accomplish? Most of us want to live a life of meaning and joy and success. And unfortunately, money is turned into this wildfire, and debt, the analogy is debt's like fire. When it's in a fireplace, it is beautiful. It provides warmth and it can do some good things for us. It gets outside the fireplace, it's going to burn down the house. And unfortunately, I think that's where we're at as a society is we're in this consumer mentality that it's, these multi-billion-dollar advertising industries are very good at playing on our desires, right? And this consumption. And so instead of us starting with an intentional, proactive plan, we wake up and just are reactive to the current of advertising, that it's like, hey, 0% interest, you can pay this as you go. And next thing you wake up and you're like, man, I've got, thousands and thousands of dollars in debt and I don't know how I got here.
Yeah. And then you don't want to get out.
Correct.
Right. And then you tack on like student loans.
Yeah.
What's your take on student loan debt? Before this interview, someone asked me to ask the question on, they have, heavy amounts of student loans. They're a W-2 employee. I don't know exactly what they make. I'm going to guess it's over that 75,000 mark. Let's just say between 75 and 100. And they also have some credit card debt. They own a house, but like, what's your advice on student loan debt these days, and how, the millennials too are like adding on student debt like it's nothing?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So first I'll address maybe if you're young or you're approaching education and maybe you just started or you're evaluating the student debt thing. Obviously, I'm a huge believer in education. I know there's a lot of rhetoric out there that you don't need a college degree. I think that's true for certain people. A lot of that's also coming out of the middle class, a white society that's saying you don't need it and they all have it. It's still a very important thing. What I would say is you have to be far more intentional on the education that you're getting for the cost. It's like anything else is, am I going to pursue a degree that's going to provide the value to overcome this student debt? Unfortunately, the interest rates are so high on the debt, right? It's usually 6 to 8%, which is very difficult. Just as a context, the rule of 72 says something that earns 7.2% will double every 10 years. So if you're not paying it off and say your interest rate's 8%, it can double on you in 10 years overnight. And so it's this mountain we've got to attack. What I would say is if you find yourself in a situation with a lot of debt, the first is it's like, how do we eat an elephant one bite at a time? And you have to get your cash flow under control. So instead of being overwhelmed by the amount of debt, first start with fundamentals. Am I living below my means? So if I make $100,000, first, do I understand what my after-tax net paycheck is? So first, if you're a 1099 employee, especially, or independent contractor, and you're not a W-2 employee, first save for taxes. That should automatically go into a separate account so you don't find yourself in a tax situation. But second, pay yourself first. So you should right away off the top be saving, depending on ages, at least 10% of your gross income should be going towards savings, right? And then you've now put yourself in a situation where you're, i.e. back to the health conversation, you're in a calorie deficit. Like we know we're going to make progress because I've structurally set up my day-to-day finances that I can finally get out of this rhythm. And what I would say is you've got to ask yourself, do I want kind of the instant gratification where I just keep kicking the debt down the road? Or do I want to make some of the hard sacrifice today to really tackle a large part of it within your income? So you've got to get down to your nitty gritty of like, what are your basics? What are your necessities? Like your food, your living, your insurance. Outside of that, like what's necessary? And I think that's a hard question because we do want to live our good life. So I'm a big believer in kind of the FIRE movement now of, really retiring early and enjoying your money today.
Right.
But there's also this irresponsibility of just like not paying attention to debt.
Right.
So in summation, number one, get real with your current finances, live below your means, and then whatever number, if it's 10%, 30% of your income, once we've got that set aside, we can now start to tackle the debt conversation because the next set of questions is like, do I contribute to my 401k or do I pay off my debt? Those are real questions.
Yeah.
First thing, eliminate high interest debt. So personal credit card debt, like credit card debt is never a good thing. Personal debt is never a good thing.
Yeah.
If you need to bring on debt to buy a car to get to a job, I understand that. Credit card debt, and we've all been there. I'm not attacking someone. It's just more of, those rates are usually 22 to 30%. Like that's like making 25% on your money. Pay down that credit card debt as quick as possible. And your student loans, as much as we don't like them and it is high interest, you got to find a payment that's not going to stress you out too much and make some headway there. You get to write off, a little bit of the interest on your taxes. So from a priority standpoint, tackle your high personal debt first, your credit card debt, then hit your student loans. And then, ultimately the only good debt is what we would say debt for home ownership.
Got it. And you mentioned, live below your means. To me, that means some sacrifices. What are some sacrifices you think that people could, do without?
Yeah, I think a part of this, before you start tackling line items in your budget, which is where most people start, it's like, I love the question, who do you want to be, right? These are identity questions. The most impactful book that's helped me think through this, and it's not even a finance book, is Atomic Habits by James Clear, is he talks a tremendous amount of like, goals aren't necessarily bad. They're just not the best place to start. It's more about identity and habit formation of going, this is what defines me, and then my finances can fall in line. Because we were all in high school at some point. We were all young adults where we had no money. Yeah. And it was like, man, if I could just have a few bucks to hang out with my friends, grab a bite to eat.
We were happy.
We were super happy, right? And then what we did is like, hey, I make some money. I'm going to create some debt. Now I've created this lifestyle that I've got to maintain. And I think Will Smith has that famous line of like, we spend entirely too much money trying to impress the people we don't even care about. And I think we find ourselves in that situation. So what I would say is the necessities. It's like, figure out what do you need from an eating standpoint, from a health standpoint. So you might decide like your CrossFit membership, like for Sadie and I, my wife and I, like our health, we understand is a big part of what's important to us. So we spend money on the gym, which means we sacrifice in other areas. We don't, maybe we don't go out on the weekends and get to blow it out as often as some of his other friends, or don't take as big as trips. So I would say, like, figure out what your base expenses are, and then decide, like, realistically, you won't miss your 10% of your income. Yeah. Like, I promise you won't miss it. And here's also the other things. The sacrifice on the short end, you might look around and feel like you're missing out because your friends are doing something. But I promise you 5 years down the road, like, things flip and you're in such a better situation. And at the end of the day, I would say Instagram, like, while it's a beautiful gift to let us stay connected and see things, like, I also think that it makes us compare a lot. And comparison is like the thief of all joy. Yeah. Right? Like, part of your finances, you'll hear me define who you want to be and align your finances to that. Because at the end of the day, it's like the deathbed. Did I spend time with the people I love? Yeah. Like, do that. It's actually really cheap to do that.
You can't take it with you, right?
Can't take it with you. And ultimately, like, it provides all of this debt is just stress. Like, things are stress. Like, a life of simplicity brings freedom and joy. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to go back really quick. You mentioned the book Atomic Habits, which is one of my favorite books. I actually did a training on it almost a year ago. But what I loved about that book so much was that you create habits, which then creates a system, and that system will get you to that goal. And I think when we first started this podcast, you talked about, you would sit down with someone and kind of like go through what they have to offer financially, and it could be a system, I think you were getting at, or maybe buckets. Yep. Right. But for those of you that are listening, I would highly recommend Atomic Habits. Just a great book. And I do truly believe that habits create a system, and that system will get you to a goal, no matter what goal it is, whether it's finances or health. If you can create those habits, you can achieve the goal. Next question, 401k. What's your take on, say you work at a company, you're a W-2 employee, and they don't offer 401k. I know you brought that up about, do I put money in my 401k or do I save it, or for taxes or whatever? What's your take on 401k in that certain situation?
Yeah, in a situation where you're a W-2 employee, or maybe you're a 1099 independent contractor, and you don't have a company offering you a retirement plan, the good news is you can set up your own retirement plan, right? Whether And just as a very basic understanding, a retirement plan, why it's important is the government gives you certain tax benefits to contribute. And the original intention behind the retirement plan was to incentivize communities and people to contribute, ultimately so we're not a strain on the Social Security system. But in that situation, set up your own traditional individual retirement account. It's called an IRA. Everybody can contribute to one. What type? If you make less than, you're single and I don't have the exact number, but it's around $150,000. If you make less than that, there's something called a Roth IRA. Roth, the difference between that and a traditional, the money that goes into the Roth eventually is going to grow tax-free. The one that's inside your 401k, your IRA, is going to grow tax-deferred. And so I think it's really wise.
And there's a certain age when you can take that out, right?
Correct. So that money's tied up till you're 59 and a half. Once again, I promise you won't miss it. If you are an employee and your company offers you a 401k, so many of them offer matches, that is free money. Like, at least contribute. So if they're going to match 3%, at least contribute the 3%. It's a no-brainer. And I just want to go back to your point of it's all systems, right? I think it's clear talks about you're not going to rise to the level of your goals. You're going to fall to the quality of your system. Mm-hmm. And your finances is the same thing. There's only 4 buckets of money you talked about, right? You first can owe money. So you're going to owe the government. Everybody owes the government. Yeah, right. Set that aside. Then the next is savings. And so that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Then there's giving, and I'm a big believer that generosity breaks the power of money. I truly believe it's better to give than receive, and that puts perspective into the type of lifestyle you're living. And then the last one is what am I going to keep for myself to live? And if you can just simplify it down to there's only 4 buckets, and if I have 100%, what percentage needs to go into each bucket? Mm-hmm. It makes it really easy to automate your finances.
Sure. You talked about giving. Is that a charitable thing you do? Where do you give your money?
Yeah. So,
if you don't mind me asking.
No, it's a great question. I would say this. When it comes to money, we talk a lot about if you want to know what's important to someone is look at their bank account and then look at their calendar, right? We know this, that don't tell me what's important to you, show me. And if I looked at your spending over the last 12 months, I would be able to pull out what you truly value. Mm. And so for Sadie and I, my wife and I, we've been super blessed, and it's something that's very important to us where we give both of our time and our money. So we oversee something called the Rio Vista Community Center down in South Phoenix that put a free farmers market on every 2 weeks that we do. But we contribute to that. We contribute to the church that we belong to. We contribute to an organization we're super passionate about called One Mission. It's a community development organization that builds homes in Mexico, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. So, for me, it's less of telling people, hey, you've got to give this amount of money to this organization, but it's more of think of all the times you've been the benefactor of somebody else's giving and blessing, and you realize hey, me foregoing that Starbucks drink for one time to help in this situation, there's nothing better than when you can help somebody.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I love that answer. And I know this sounds a little deep, you guys, but the tithing or giving charitable or even paying for someone's Starbucks coffee who's behind you, I truly believe, and we can just say it's like karma. It's like good karma, and it'll come back to you. But the ability to help others is truly what this world is about.
Yeah.
Thanks for the answer. Real quick, go back on credit card. Is there a certain product or credit card that you recommend if you're able to, apply and get that?
Yeah. So here's what I would say about credit cards, right? All these rewards programs, whether it's cash back or it's, Southwest Airlines or it's XYZ, remember that these are companies that are setting these programs ultimately to entrap you with the hope that you won't pay your credit card balance off fully every month. So first and foremost, understand you should never touch a credit card if you don't have the self-discipline to do the blocking and tackling. If you haven't set money aside for taxes, if you haven't paid yourself first in savings, do not pass go, do not get a credit card. if you have the ability to use it, can be a great thing, right? We spend all of our money on Southwest credit cards so that my wife flies for free. And so it's been a big benefit. So I would say, number one, like if you travel a lot, they're preferred cards. There's I believe it's called the Travel Points guy online that is, if you travel, this guy's an assassin. Like he's figured out everything. Like we literally flew to Hawaii, 4 of us, for like $250 recently.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that
using
one.
a Delta card and transferring points. And so the points guy, it's unbelievable. I would say a lot of the great credit cards out there, if you're just beginning, maybe you're trying to establish credit, which we see a lot with our 18-year-old kids. Capital One, cash back, no annual fee card is great. As far as like a business card, the Chase Sapphire card is very popular and is a great card. So I'd say those two. Yeah. I personally use American Express a lot. It seems to be, there's some other travel benefits, but number one, and I should make the disclosure, I have no incentive to which credit card I recommend, but it's coming down to like, am I going to use it? And if you're not going to use it for travel, just get cash back points.
Got it.
Like cash back against your statement credit card.
So I took a financial course before, you helped me get my finances in line, and it was a Dave Ramsey course. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've heard of it. It actually was very helpful for me.
Absolutely.
To really conquer any debt and just a different way to look at it. He recommends, I believe, not to have a credit card, and
Correct.
That's the reason I ask you. But I personally believe, and I have both those cards. I have a Southwest and I have the Sapphire. But I also believe in this day and age that you should have one for an emergency.
100%.
I know there are people that may not have the discipline and may use it for other things, but in my opinion, I just feel like it's great to have an emergency. Even like if you're renting a car, right, and they put
Correct.
that $200 or $250 deposit, whatever, and you may not have that in your account, or you don't want it to go out of your account.
I would say it's to your point. There are some great benefits, right? Whether it's renting the car and it's got the extra insurance protection, you travel abroad, right? Whatever there's the credit card has some great features of it, but interesting note you hit from Dave Ramsey and the Total Money Makeover. Once again, it's a system and it's a process, and the reason he vilifies the credit card or the debt is most people don't have the discipline to not fall into that trap because you swipe your card. And this is the introduction of the debit card. We're not even talking the credit card. The introduction of the debit card, people's spending increased by 30%.
Wow.
Because it's out of sight, out of mind. I'm not having to part with my hard-earned physical cash. Right. And so just me using my credit card hurts. Yeah. The good news, there's incredible apps out there, whether it's mint.com, personalcapital.com, that can set up, the Apple credit card's actually a good example that's bringing awareness to your daily spending, that it's like, hey, I can get the benefit of the credit card, but still the accountability of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that answer. For you guys listening, that's great feedback. Next question. A lot of people, the gig economy started, I think, pretty powerfully in like 2011, 2012, and now you have like Uber and Uber Eats and Amazon, and there's additional ways to make a secondary income, right? And some of us look at that as an actual business, right? So what's your take on someone who has, a full-time job but they have side income? What would you do with that? And if they looked at it as a business, should they reinvest into that, or what would you do with that money?
Yeah. The gig economy has been a huge blessing, right? And I think we're only going to continue to see it go that direction. What I'd say is it goes back again to like, who are you and what are you trying to accomplish? Because is this side gig ultimately to get you out of your job? Is it for just extra spending money? Is it to help you tackle the credit card? Is it help you to get to a certain place? The reason I say that is, if it's just extra like side money, cool. But if you actually want to call yourself an entrepreneur and a business owner, and the goal is freedom and flexibility to ultimately move you out of maybe something where you're highly dependent on a job, which is not financial freedom. Financial freedom being defined is that I can wake up and have income coming in that is not dependent on me performing a specific job. then you better have a plan, right? And you should reinvest in that business. This really comes down to the biggest mistake I see is somebody gets a side gig and they just spend the money.
Yeah.
Like they just let their lifestyle increase as opposed to like, no. You're never going to get out of your situation that you don't want to be in because you're not willing to make the sacrifice over here. And the sacrifice over here is, hey, if this business is growing, how do I reinvest? How do I double down? How do I treat this as a pro? I think a lot of the language we use is like, are you an amateur or pro? Either's fine, right? Like I like to go out and play softball. And I have a great time, but I don't think I'm competing for the World Series,
right.
Nor do I kid myself. I don't handle myself when I'm out on the softball field the way I did when I was a part of the Detroit Tigers organization.
Yeah.
And so this side hustle, like the best advice is if financial freedom's really the goal, treat it as a business.
Absolutely. I want to go into the next topic, real estate. So obviously I retired at probably the worst time, which was 2007, and then the economy crashed based on the real estate market, and a lot of my money was invested in real estate. So it scared me, big time. And I was always afraid to buy another house or even have a rental property or anything like that because of what happened. Also, that was a huge thing that may not ever happen again in a lifetime. But what's your take on real estate investing? Or even just owning a house as an investment.
Yeah. So real estate's a big conversation. I think it's one of those things, whether it's rich dad, poor dad, or, so many people we've seen wealth be generated via real estate. I'm from California. I watched my parents' wealth be generated significantly during that whole real estate boom in the 90s. And so real estate as a investment vehicle can make a lot of sense. The question is it the right investment given your specific investment plan? And the reason I say that is people hold it out as, like it's this like golden nugget that is guaranteed to go up. And as we know from 2007 and 2008, it carries just as much risk. Most people don't understand that real estate's a private investment, very much like going to a private country club. There's a cost to this, right? So sure, there's higher expected returns, but there's actually a lot more risk as opposed to still investing in real estate, but accessing it through a real estate investment trust, which is just a publicly traded fund on the stock exchange, right? And so the reason I say a lot about this is most people, this blows their mind. Over the last 50 years, the average return of real estate as an asset class, 3%.
Wow.
3%. We're not talking about like this crazy amount of money.
Right.
So first and foremost, I would say owning your home is a good asset. Don't look at it as an investment because they're serving two different functions. Number one, it's giving you a place to live. That's why you should buy it. You can't control where the market's at and what's going on in life. So all of a sudden you go from 1 to 3 kids. Now all of a sudden the market's, down, but you have to move for space. Like, is that a bad investment on your end? No, it's like life circumstances for your ownership. Passive income, I think real estate can be very good. What I would say is you're not the only one thinking about this, right? And so I know of a private equity company that in 2019, they bought 60,000 single-family home residential across the United States. That's who you're competing against. And so ultimately, if your goal is to create passive income that's not dependent on you working, there are other vehicles that carry less risk. But if you do real estate, you've got to know the financials. And this goes back to your side gig. If you want to treat it as a business, if you don't understand your balance sheet, your income, your profit loss, your cash flow, if you can't understand company financials, you have no business being in a business. If you can't understand the internal rate of return or how to evaluate real estate property from a true investment standpoint, like you just shouldn't be in it.
Yeah, no, God, those are some great answers. What's your take on refinancing your home?
Yeah. So number one, we're in one of the lowest interest rate environments we'll probably ever see in our lifetime, which is a huge opportunity. I think it's great. The cost of ownership the cost of borrowing debt's at one of the lowest levels, not the actual cost of homes. But I think taking advantage of lower rates is great. So if maybe you're in an interest rate that was in the 5s or higher and you have an opportunity to evaluate that, I think it's great. I would say it's not great for 2 reasons. If you're taking money out to just pay off personal debt, but you don't have a plan to make sure you never get back into debt, then don't do it. Because that's what you see a lot of is I'll cash out of my house, I'll pay off my high interest rate debt, but I actually haven't solved like what's the root cause of that. So you've really hurt yourself. And then when you're working with a refi person, don't extend your loan. So maybe you're 10 years into your loan. Maybe you signed up for a 30 and you're down to 20 years. Don't refi back out into a 30 because the amount of interest is you're just going to get crushed. So refinancing, great opportunity. Make sure that you're talking to a actual mortgage expert that you trust that's going to say like, hey, this is what I would do for my family. So just devil is in the details, but it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to ask is like put it on their side. If this was you, what would you do?
Yeah.
Especially as a professional. And that's what I've done a lot with Erik. I'll bounce ideas off him or just advice, asking him, hey, if this was you or if you were me, what would you do?
Yeah.
And you've been very helpful in that regard. Thank you. What about some resources? What have been some good resources that you would advise someone to look into, whether it's books or podcasts to listen to, apps? What do you preach?
Yeah, so if you are trying to tackle maybe learning about, I'll start with investing and then work backwards. If you're trying to learn about investing, 2 of the best websites out there is number 1 is Betterment. So betterment.com. John Stein is one of the guys behind it. That it's just fantastic. I think they've done a good job of demystifying what investing is all about. It's very systematic. It's millennial focused or tech focused. Great content. I mean, I'm in a situation where we deal with clients with multi millions. I read Betterment every single day because it's some of the best education I've ever seen. And it's a great asset. If someone isn't an ideal fit from a client standpoint, I refer them to Betterment. So huge fan.
When you say you read Betterment, is that like an app that you can, do they put like daily?
Yeah, they have an app, but they have a blog.
Oh, awesome.
And the resources are just so fantastic. It's, a lot of the questions that you have on a daily basis around personal finance. It's far more than just investing. So, Betterment's a great one. Personal Capital's great because it actually has an app that you don't have to be a client, you don't have to invest, but you can set it up and it tracks every dollar in and out of your account. And so you can see in real time. It's kind of like mint.com. Like you can see where your money's at, which is fantastic. I would tell you it's old school, but Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover, like the guy, he's not my favorite personality in the world, but his system works, and I think it's good.
Yeah.
And so I would pick that up. And then for a lot of the people in the gig economy, 2 resources. Number 1, specifically on the finance side, the name of the book is I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And his whole thing, it's like how to automate your finances and how to think about that. That's really good. And then one of the best podcasts / experts, a guy named Brian Clark of 7 Figure Small. This guy is fantastic about how do you create theoretically a 7-figure business without employees or investors.
Wow. Okay, I got to listen to that one. That's great. Last topic. You have a beautiful family, father of 2, boy and girl. We got to pay for their college. I'm a father of 3. I have 3 daughters, so I have college and weddings to pay for. What is some advice that you'd give? Let's just talk about me. Like, what advice would you give me for helping provide for them for their college education and obviously a wedding?
Yeah. So you're going to get tired of me saying this. It returns back to systems, processes, priorities, goals, because money is finite. We can't do everything with it. So if we're trying to tackle high interest debt, very candidly, like I would not be saving for college education. If we were in a situation where we've eliminated all personal debt, maybe we only have a mortgage and a car payment, I would start, you can set up what's called a 5-2-9 college education plan. And the benefit, it kind of works like a 401k. The money that ends up into this account grows tax deferred. And actually, as long as you use it for education, it comes out tax free. There's some caveats on that if it doesn't get used for education, but it's a great vehicle to use. There's tax benefits, and I would say start small. Don't feel like you've got to fund your daughter or son's Harvard education today, but any amount of money is going to be great. And I think that goes into going back to those priorities of going, hey, if I make $100,000, like how important is providing college education versus the family vacation versus the food budget that allows me to eat at Whole Foods over Sprouts. And so that's different for every family. I've heard a justification for, like if you equip your child as an entrepreneur, like I wouldn't save for college. I don't subscribe to that. Sure. But 529 college education plan is the way to go if that's a priority. The wedding thing, man. Whoo! Convince your daughter and your sons that it's more about the people that are there and who you love than it's crazy. I think the average cost of a wedding now is like in the 30s.
It's insane.
$30,000.
They're just not allowed to get married. That's it.
Crazy.
There we go. I answered my own question. To go back to the 529, you said, if someone were to do that, where would they go about getting that set up? And then how often would you recommend them actually putting into that account?
Yeah, so good question. So the 529 is actually a state-specific program. Now you can, you don't have to, we're residents of Arizona. A lot of times I recommend the Utah plan. That's because the actual investments inside the fund lineup are great. Certain states, there are tax benefits. So be aware, just literally if you Googled, if I'm in Massachusetts 529 college education plan and look at that. Other than that, you can go directly to Vanguard.com is another great company, resources that you can find that stuff.
Awesome. And I know I said last topic, but you just made me think of some other things, so I'm not done yet. Let's go to the car. Obviously, not an investment. And I think a lot of people value themselves based on the car that they drive, right? And I think, and you and I both in professional sports see it all the time. These young kids get a bunch of money, and that's the first thing they want to buy is this car that whatever, it's called $100,000. It drives off the lot, and now it's worth $80,000. Like, what's your advice on someone purchasing a vehicle just to get you to work and get your kids to school? Yeah. So once again, it goes down to definitions and values. And the reason I think this is actually the most important thing is we live in a society that is not neutral. What I mean by that is it's not like you wake up and you walk outside your house and nobody has an agenda for you. We live in a world full of advertising and marketing, and what they want to sell us on is hey, this will make you have more joy, have more purpose, have more value if you drive my Range Rover, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you wear this material or this clothing line or XYZ. That's why Instagram influencers exist, right? Mm-hmm. And those things aren't bad when they're made for a specific tribe of people. And you've proactively, intentionally said, hey, you know what? I've got the rest of my stuff in order. I've done all the value stuff. Boom, I'm going to buy a Tesla. Great. Like, I'm a big believer in the mission and vision. Don't put your stress level through the roof and your family's financial security through the roof because you bought a $60,000 car when you could truly afford a $20,000 car. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, like, if it's really about a safe, reliable vehicle, we all know you can find those under $15,000 or $20,000. But if we're truthful with ourselves and we look in the mirror, there's a little bit of this like, well, if I show up to the office and, I go through it, I'm in a, whether I like it or not, like I'm a partner at a private wealth firm where our clients have $10 million or more, right? Mm-hmm. If I show up, I have this question. If I show up in a Ford Focus, nothing against Ford Focus. I brought that up because that's what Sadie, my wife, used to drive. It's one of my favorite rental cars.
If I show up in that versus, a car I don't own, let's call it, a Bugatti to make it so ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Like, there's this insecurity. So I think, once again, like, who are you? Like, what brings you joy? What brings you purpose? What brings you value? Because cars are one of these tricky situations, and houses are like this. It's like people will jump from like a $30,000 car to a $50,000 car in a split second. And it's like, that's not only is it a $20,000 deal, like, add on the interest rate, and, we're not talking 20 grand. This is the basic thing I do with the 18-year-old. What's the difference between the $50,000 car and the $75,000 car? The 18-year-old thinks it's 25 grand. I say that's 25 grand coming out of an investment account. And the rule of 72 we talked about actually goes 25 grand turns into 50, 50 turns into 100, 100 turns into 200. So by you spending 25 grand more on that car costs you and your family $200,000 of potential investment savings.
Wow.
So how important is you driving around that car or having 200 grand in your bank account, 30 years down the road?
Absolutely. That's impactful right there for you guys listening. Thank you for sharing that and your honesty as well. It's definitely hard to find, a middle ground too, especially in your line of work where, the world is judged by sometimes what you drive and how big your house is and stuff like that, where, it doesn't align with your true values, but it's like you have to show up and look that way, right?
Yeah.
Although you are educated enough or good enough to take care of their business, right?
Yeah.
Next question, and you really helped me force me doing this, but a living trust and will and estate for my family. I have 3 daughters, and travel a lot, and you just never know what can happen.
Yeah.
But to know that they're protected now is really, has saved my peace of mind and stress.
Yeah.
When would you recommend someone looking into, the estate, a living trust?
Yeah.
And even let's throw life insurance in there too.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that's something that, I looked at mine and I'm like, okay, I did this several years ago. I should probably relook at that, based on having 3 kids now. At the time, I only had 1.
Yeah. It's the hardest conversation because you have to face your mortality.
Mm.
Or if you have children, the hardest conversations my wife and I have had are around like, hey, if we pass away, who are going to raise our children? And this is like a real thing. My wife's dad passed away in a car wreck, and so we watched this like actually happen in her family. But it is the most important thing I would say is it's one of the first line items in your budget. If you have dependents, so you have young children or you have a wife that would need to be provided for, that you're gone, stop right now, open up Google, type in term life insurance. And term, it just means you get it for a specific set of years. It's the cheapest way to do it, and you get yourself a policy. And so, there's all these general rule of thumbs, 20 times your income, $1 million per kid. It's really the number you can get at. Term life insurance. And guess what? It is so cheap. You're talking $1 million of coverage. If you're a rather healthy individual under the age of 40, you're going to pay $30 to $40 a month. Like it's a no-brainer. On the trust side and in the estate plan, like everybody already has an estate. They just don't realize that the state that you're in is going to dictate what happens to your stuff. So the state of Arizona, if you show up and you've got no living trust, you have no will, the state public court system, they're going to appoint somebody to do it. It's going to be really expensive. It's going to be timely, and it's going to be public. Mm-hmm. And so if you want all of your affairs going on for your loved ones when you're gone in a public process that's expensive and lengthy, then don't set it up. But if you want it to be private, expedient, and you care about your loved ones, setting up a trust and a will is a no-brainer. And it's so much more than just a trust. A trust can sound like for rich people. Yeah. This is really also about who's going to take care of your finance decisions. And it's not just if you pass away. This is, you get in a car wreck and they have to put you – this happened to my friend the other day. He's in a medically induced coma. He's fine, praise Jesus. But in those situations for 3 days, he could not make his own medical or financial decisions. Have you given somebody a power of attorney to make those on your behalf? And so it's your medical decisions, your financial decisions, who's going to watch your kids, and then ultimately kind of how your stuff passes to your future family in the most expedient, least costly way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys, what he just said is so powerful, and I did this, I think, almost 2 years ago, And it was just more than who's going to make the decisions on your finances. It really was about the example he just used. Like, what if something happened to you? Who's going to make the decision to keep you on life support or something like that? But then also raise your kids. That is so important. It is an uncomfortable conversation with your loved ones, but it has to be done. I highly recommend it. Erik, last question, I promise. If you were to go back and give yourself advice when you were 18 from the financial aspect, from what you know now, what would that look like?
Ooh. It's very simple. It's very clear to me. Number one, live below your means and keep your costs as low as possible to provide you the freedom to figure out what you're passionate about and that you can wake up and do on a daily basis. I think that this is one of the biggest gifts that I tell every person, because if you want to learn the restaurant industry, you want to be able to go bus or serve tables at French Laundry to learn under Thomas Keller. You can't do that if you've created a lifestyle that's too expensive to operate, right? And so if I was 18, I would say it's the power of compound interest is, like live below your means and really define who you want to be as a person, and use that as like your metrics of when you're putting your budget together. Like your values and your budgets are not disconnected. They are so integrated and intertwined. And if you really want a life of joy and purpose and happiness and freedom, that's what it's about. Live below your means and make sure your money's attached to your values.
Awesome. And for those that are listening, where can they find you? Just maybe they have some additional questions for you. Advice, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'll make sure that obviously you provide my contact information in the show notes, but I'm on all the major channels, whatever it's Twitter, it's LinkedIn, it's Instagram, it's just Erik Averill. And also our company website's just AWM Capital. If you just type in AWM Capital, Erik Averill into Google, we pop up on the first of everything. I'd love to, point people into resources. I love education. I've, got a podcast, wrote a book, all those fun things, more tailored towards the athlete and the entrepreneur, but love doing these things. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. And you guys can also find Erik. He'll be speaking at our next summit, March 14th, here in Scottsdale, Arizona at the Clayton House. I think he's going to give a lower level on some business owners that may do this as a side income and where to start from the basics. Also, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a dear friend and helping me walking through this life. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.